I want you to do something for me just for a second, if you're in a place where you can safely do so. Just close your eyes.
Always a good way to start.
Right. I want you to picture a Buddhist monk. Just summon that standard universal archetype, like the very first image that pops into your head.
Let me guess. You see the robes.
Exactly. You see that vibrant saffron or maybe a deep, earthy maroon color.
Hmm.
You see a shaved head.
They're probably sitting in a full lotus position.
Yes, perfectly serene.
Yeah.
Completely silent, just meditating. They are, the absolute picture of peace and mental stillness.
It is a profoundly comforting mental image, honestly. That solitary figure represents this pristine isolation from the chaos, the noise and demands of the modern world. It's like the visual equivalent of taking a deep breath.
And the standard belief in the West, I mean, the heavily polished PR version of Buddhism you find in the paperback section of any airport bookstore is that this monk is essentially an atheist.
Right, that they practice a pure philosophy of mind.
Exactly. It's the perfect spiritual framework for, say, a Silicon Valley CEO looking for some mental hygiene. There's no creator god to worry about, no heavy supernatural baggage. It's just breathing, mindfulness, observing your thoughts.
But there's a catch.
A massive catch. When you actually start digging into the historical and practical reality of Tibetan Buddhism, that peaceful atheist image just completely shatters.
Oh, it falls apart immediately. When you look closely at the actual daily practices of these traditions, you are confronted with rituals that look remarkably like straight-up sorcery.
Yeah, it's wild.
You find the active, deliberate invocation of external entities, like the goddess Tara, for example. You find intense, desperate worship that completely contradicts the idea of a purely internal meditation.
So the mission of our deep dive today is to explore an incredibly provocative hypothesis. It's called strategic denial.
It's a fascinating concept.
We're looking at this glaring disconnect and asking, is the supposed atheism of Buddhism actually just a historical survival strategy?
Right.
Was this entire narrative of we are just harmless philosophers designed deliberately to stop powerful, hostile empires from wiping them out?
And to guide us through this historical maze, we are looking at the teachings and research of a source known as Osman. He's also referred to as the blind Muslim yogi.
Which is an incredible title.
It really is. But before we get into the heavy geopolitics and the historical mechanics of his theory, I need to be explicitly clear with you, the listener.
Yes, very important.
Because this material contains some highly politically charged historical assertions regarding the actions of both the Chinese and British empires, we are strictly acting as impartial guides here.
Absolutely.
We are not taking sides, and we're not endorsing the viewpoints of the content. Our job is simply to unpack Osman's arguments and synthesize the sources for you to consider objectively.
Okay, let's unpack this, because to understand the paradox, we first have to look at the literal evidence of magic in this supposedly godless religion.
Right.
You open any standard Western textbook on Eastern philosophy, and you almost always get that famous quote attributed to the historical Buddha: "Be a lamp unto yourself."
The implication is pretty obvious. Do not look for answers outside of your own mind. You are the ultimate authority of your own enlightenment.
Exactly. That is the philosophical baseline.
But then you take a trip up into the Himalayas, you immerse yourself in Tibetan Tantra, and you encounter an entirely different universe.
And just for context, Tantra in this sense isn't about the westernized concept of intimacy, right?
No, not at all. It is a highly complex, esoteric system. It uses intense rituals, visualizations, and energetic practices as a shortcut to enlightenment.
Okay.
And within that system, you find the Mahavidyas. These are the great wisdom goddesses. But they are not wise in the gentle, grandmotherly sense you might expect.
Yeah, they are terrifying.
They represent raw, untamed cosmic forces. We are talking about the personification of time, destruction, death, and radical, painful transformation.
The aesthetic is deeply jarring if you're expecting serene mindfulness. We are talking about wrathful deities here. If you've ever seen authentic Tibetan Thangka paintings or statues, they have, like, elongated fangs.
Bulging, bloodshot eyes.
Yes. They wear necklaces made out of freshly severed human heads. And they're depicted standing in the center of roaring halos of fire, literally trampling on corpses.
It's intense, and the crucial element that our source, Osman, zeroes in on is the mechanical nature of how these deities are treated by the practitioners.
This is where his unique background becomes essential, right?
Completely. Because he isn't an academic historian sitting in a dusty university library translating ancient texts, he is a master-level bioenergy healer with 50 years of intense practical experience.
The briefing documents detail that he's been doing this since the 1970s.
Right.
He specializes in critical care, utilizing what he describes as telepathic and quantum healing principles for severe recovery and terminal illnesses.
And I know quantum healing can sound like a massive buzzword,
It really can.
but Osman uses it to describe a specific framework. It's the idea that human consciousness is a non-local force that can intentionally interact with and alter the physical energy grid of the human body.
And his personal dedication to this is staggering. He used to practice 18 hours a day just to build his capacity.
18 hours?
Yeah. Even now, he practices 8 to 10 hours daily to, as he calls it, sharpen the sword.
So when someone with that extreme level of sensory discipline and energetic sensitivity looks at a group of monks chanting to a terrifying deity adorned with skulls, he is looking through a functional lens.
Not an anthropological one.
Exactly. He doesn't see a quaint cultural metaphor for overcoming inner demons. He sees the literal mechanics of energy work being deployed.
Oh.
He views chanting as an acoustic and energetic technology. The specific tonal frequencies, the breath control, the singular visualization, it is all designed to alter physical reality.
See, I actually struggle with the standard academic view of this because of a massive logical pushback that Osman highlights.
Let's hear it.
Well, in the Tibetan traditions, there are countless recorded texts and oral stories of the goddess Tara actively rescuing travelers from physical danger.
Right, like physical intervention.
Yeah, we are talking about stories where a merchant is attacked by bandits, they chant to Tara, and she miraculously intervenes to save them. If we follow the standard Western interpretation that Tara is simply a psychological metaphor for cultivating your own inner courage, how does an abstract psychological concept physically disarm a guy swinging a sword at you on a mountain pass?
It fundamentally cannot. A metaphor does not deflect a blade.
It makes zero logical sense to view it that way. Invoking an external, wrathful entity to physically protect your life from an immediate, tangible threat is not an atheistic philosophy of mind.
No, it's not.
That is theistic protection magic.
Yeah.
You are actively asking an outside superior force to alter physical reality on your behalf.
What's fascinating here is how Osman views these rituals as an advanced defense mechanism. He recognizes that these incantations and the intense focus on wrathful forms require an immense amount of cultivated energy.
Energy he's familiar with?
Precisely. He sees them pulling the exact same energetic levers he uses when attempting to manipulate reality or heal a critical illness. To him, these monks are accessing a developer console for reality,
Oh, I love that analogy.
running complex scripts that have been passed down for centuries.
But wait, if they possess this literal magic system, or at least intensely practice the rituals of one, why tell the rest of the world that they are just quietly watching their breath?
That is the big question.
If you have this incredible, potent spiritual technology, why disguise it as harmless philosophy?
Well, the causality behind that shift moves us from theology directly into brutal geopolitics.
Okay.
You have to zoom out and look at the map of Asia. Tibet has historically been this isolated spiritual fortress sitting on the roof of the world. But right next door, you have China.
A massive superpower.
Historically, yes. Whether you are talking about the ancient dynastic emperors or the modern bureaucratic state, Chinese governance has always placed a massive premium on order, stability, pragmatism, and absolute unquestioned control.
Wait, I'm struggling with the leap here. I understand the desire for control, but why would a secular or highly pragmatic general care if some monks are chanting to a statue in the mountains?
Because
If the Chinese leadership is so pragmatic, shouldn't they just view it as backward, harmless superstition?
yeah.
Why does that suddenly become a military threat?
Because of the sheer scale, the organization, and the explicit claims of what that power can do. Imagine you are that pragmatic Chinese commander tasked with pacifying a region.
Okay.
You march your soldiers into a temple complex expecting to find docile philosophers sweeping the courtyard. Instead, you are confronted with colossal statues of demonic-looking figures wreathed in fire,
Right.
and hundreds of fiercely disciplined monks loudly chanting aggressive incantations to summon these entities. To a state that demands a monopoly on power, an organized group claiming to wield supernatural forces that can intervene in the physical world is a direct, intolerable challenge.
It doesn't look like a quaint religion. It looks like an insurgency actively trying to raise a localized demon.
Exactly, and the historical consequence of that perception was devastating. According to the claims synthesized in Osman's research, Chinese forces have killed over 1 million Tibetans throughout history, specifically because of their link to the worship of these fearful deities.
Over 1 million.
Yes. Maintaining these gods wasn't just a cultural friction point, it was a lethal liability. If you worship an interventionist goddess who protects her followers from armies, you are an enemy of the state.
It is like, imagine you run a clandestine radio station during wartime, broadcasting coordinates and intelligence.
Okay, yeah.
When the enemy patrols suddenly knock on the front door, you immediately rip out the transmitter, throw on some smooth jazz, and claim you are just running a harmless vintage record shop.
That's a perfect way to put it. You hide the dangerous technology to avoid execution.
Exactly. The abbots and the lamas realized they were facing annihilation. So they aggressively reframed their entire public narrative. They essentially told the Chinese, no, you misunderstand our culture completely.
We don't believe in external gods.
Right. We are atheists, just like you. These scary statues, they are merely psychological metaphors for our own internal struggles with ego and ignorance. We are totally harmless.
And this raises an important question about the long-term corrosive effects of survival tactics. What happens when a conscious lie, told purely to protect your monasteries from being burned to the ground, is passed down over hundreds of years?
Oh, wow.
Eventually, the original context of the lie fades away. The generations that follow inherit the camouflage, and that camouflage becomes the ingrained doctrine.
The disguise just becomes the truth.
Yes.
The paradox gets baked right into the cultural DNA. The ritual remains intact, the complex incantations remain, but the stated belief system layered over top of it completely contradicts what the practitioners are actively doing.
It is a brilliant, albeit tragic, form of strategic denial. The theology morphs to protect the physical survival of the practitioners, even if it means obscuring the original intent of the practices themselves.
Now, if you're listening to this and wondering if this is just an isolated Tibetan quirk, you have to look at where Buddhism actually came from to see the broader pattern.
Right, back to India.
The historical Buddha was an Indian prince. The spiritual DNA of Tibet migrated directly over the mountains from India. And Osman's research highlights that India faced the exact same dynamic, just dealing with a different empire.
The British Empire provides a near-perfect parallel here. When the British colonized India, they inevitably encountered Hindu Tantra.
And the Victorians were not exactly open-minded.
Not at all. They had incredibly rigid, deeply sanitized ideas about what constituted a proper and civilized religion. When they looked at native tantric practices, which prominently involved animal blood sacrifice, sacred sexuality, massive fire rituals,
Yeah, the heavy stuff.
and the fervent worship of fierce, terrifying goddesses like Kali, they were utterly repulsed. They viewed the entire system as savage, chaotic, and barbaric.
But the British approach was different, wasn't it? They didn't necessarily just burn the temples down and execute the priests the way the Chinese generals did in Tibet.
No, they used a softer, but arguably much more insidious and pervasive kind of pressure.
Social shame.
Exactly. They used academic mockery. They leveraged the entire colonial education system to essentially embarrass the native population into ideological compliance.
That is so dark.
The societal pressure to assimilate to the colonial gaze was immense. To survive socially and politically, to secure jobs in the administration, and to be taken seriously by the British elite, Hindu intellectuals began to systematically sanitize their own religion.
They started hiding it.
They started actively suppressing and hiding the fierce tantric elements from public view. They shifted the global focus of Hinduism toward vegetarianism, toward Brahmanism, which is the high, pure, philosophical tier of the religion.
And they heavily promoted non-dualism.
Yes, exactly.
For those unfamiliar, non-dualism is the abstract philosophical concept that everything in the universe is ultimately one single cosmic consciousness rather than a pantheon of distinct intervening gods.
By emphasizing that, they made their religion look remarkably similar to Western monotheism.
They were essentially saying, look, British overlords, we aren't savages worshiping blood-drinking demons in the jungle. We actually just believe in one supreme abstract truth. It is very sophisticated, kind of like your Christian God.
They executed a masterful theological pivot. They rewrote their own public-facing ideology to be completely compatible with the values of their conquerors.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Think about the clean, palatable yoga studio version of Hinduism that the West absolutely loves today.
Oh, absolutely.
The stretching, the overpriced green juice, the generic positive vibes, the no-mistake bumper stickers. That entire aesthetic is actually a historical byproduct of trying to please the British Empire.
It's incredible to think about.
Just like the atheistic mindfulness app version of Buddhism was meant to placate the Chinese state, it is a universal historical playbook. When you are conquered by a massive, overwhelming military force, you rewrite your open source code to be compatible with a rigid legacy operating system just to avoid being uninstalled. You hide your fangs.
You hide your fangs so that your culture can survive to see another century. But if you accept the premise that both of these major Eastern traditions were fundamentally camouflaged by immense political pressure, it forces a radical reevaluation.
Of what?
Well, what is actually left underneath when you strip all that historical pain away?
So if the atheist philosopher version of Buddhism is just the geopolitical disguise, who was the real historical Buddha?
This brings us to Osman's most controversial assertion. Based on his deep understanding of energy mechanics and a close reading of the fragments of tantric practice that miraculously survived these historical purges, he argues that the original historical Buddha actively practiced the worship of the tantric order.
Hold on. What are the actual breadcrumbs for that? How does Osman make that massive leap from Buddhism has magic in it to the Buddha himself was a sorcerer?
He looks at the earliest surviving texts not as mythological fairy tales, but as technical instruction manuals.
Instruction manuals. Okay.
When you read about the intense energetic demands of early ascetic practices, the advanced states of matter manipulation, and the descriptions of localized energy fields, academics just write them off as poetic embellishment.
Like, oh, it's just a nice story.
Right. But Osman argues that if you understand the physics of energy work, those texts describe highly advanced practical mechanics. The idea of the Buddha as solely a rational, secular philosopher sitting quietly under a tree is a much later historical construct.
Wow.
The mechanical truth suggests the Buddha was likely a tantric sorcerer mastering these forces.
Consider the massive layered irony of that for a second.
Yeah.
Right now, in the modern era, Tibetan culture is still under severe threat. To preserve their traditions, many Tibetan lamas are migrating to the West. But they are migrating to a Western culture that has completely enthusiastically bought into the fake, atheistic, philosophical version of Buddhism.
It's totally backwards.
So these lamas are setting up meditation centers, teaching mindfulness, all in order to secretly preserve the authentic, deity-worshipping, magical version that they originally had to hide in the East.
The historical loops are just dizzying. And when Osman looks at this history, he isn't just cataloging a tragic cultural shift. He frames the suppression of these practices as the catastrophic loss of a vital technology.
Lost technology.
We aren't just talking about lost myths or forgotten folklore. We're talking about the lost software of the human spirit. Intricate methods of healing, of interacting with the physical environment, of surviving extreme physiological conditions, all systematically wiped out or driven underground by the physical hardware of conquering armies.
This frames Osman's modern mission in a completely different light. He isn't trying to start a new religion or sell a belief system. He is actively trying to democratize this lost technology and reintroduce it in an environment entirely free from that ancient colonial fear.
And his approach is grounded in strict boundaries. He frames this energy work as strictly complementary to modern medicine, never a replacement for a doctor.
That's a crucial distinction.
Definitely. His methodology scales directly with the intensity of the energetic demands. For the heavy lifting, the critical care scenarios that require hours of his focused energy transfer and quantum healing techniques, he operates a premium service like on Patreon.
Sure.
But his broader goal is accessibility. He distributes free, 5-minute protocols on his platforms like YouTube so anyone can begin testing these ancient mechanisms for themselves.
That's amazing.
He even formulated a specific 10-minute protocol designed to alter the energetic frequency of anxiety, and it costs less than a Starbucks coffee. He is methodically trying to sneak practical mechanics back into a modern world that completely forgot they ever existed.
To quickly recap the incredible journey we just took, we started with the jarring paradox of supposedly godless Buddhist monks actively invoking the fierce, sword-wielding goddess Tara.
A huge contradiction.
We then explored Osman's hypothesis of strategic denial, looking at how the brutal military threat of the Chinese state forced the Tibetans to rebrand their highly energetic religion as a harmless atheistic philosophy just to survive.
Right.
We saw that exact same survival mechanism play out in India, where Hindu Tantra was systematically sanitized to appease the Victorian sensibilities of the British Empire.
And finally, we stripped the pain away to land on the provocative idea that the historical Buddha himself was likely a tantric sorcerer, and the real magic has been hidden as lost technology ever since. It is a profound and unsettling reframing of recorded history.
It really is. And if you're listening to this, I want you to think about how this narrative changes your perception of the mundane world around you. Next time you see a little serene Buddha statue sitting quietly on a shelf in a friend's living room or at the front desk of a local yoga studio, you have to wonder.
Are you looking at a simple symbol of inner peace?
Exactly. Or are you looking at the ultimate centuries-old disguise? Are you looking at a fierce ancient power that had to put on a polite smile just to avoid being destroyed?
That leads to a much larger final thought for you to mull over. If the powerful practical software of the human spirit in Tibet and India was actively deleted, driven underground, and deliberately downgraded to mere metaphor by the hardware of conquering armies, what other ancient myths, superstitions, or indigenous folklore around the entire globe might actually be highly advanced survival technology?
Oh, that's a brilliant question.
How much of human potential has been deliberately hidden in plain sight just to appease the conquerors?
That is exactly the kind of question that will keep you up at night.
Mm.
If you want to explore the specific energetic tools that Osman has salvaged from this suppressed history, you can find his free protocols and his premium critical care services at yogawellness786.com. Until next time, remember to always look beneath the surface. Now close your eyes again, picture that monk, and ask yourself what he is really doing in the silence.